Professor Emeritus of Hold on, I'm going to hit my OK to record button and turn off my music. All right, so we have tonight David Brownstone, Professor Emeritus of Economics, joined by William Parker, another Professor Emeritus of Physics and Astronomy. These two folks have had a lot of experience with retirement, with benefits, with the long history with UCI. So we'll hear from them, as well as Thuy Vu, Assistant Director of Academic Affairs in the School of Medicine, and her team. There's Sarah Gagaris, Benefits and Retirement Manager, Susan Deratia of Benefits and Retirement Analyst, Roy Giles, Benefits and Retirement, and Jason Walters, UCI Fidelity Workplace Consultant. And there's another individual from Fidelity as well, Jin Kim. So stock questions, retirement questions, although we will start tonight with Bill Parker, who will tell us a little bit of the history of the various tiers of the retirement program here, and then followed by a presentation by David Brownstone. So Dr. Parker, you want to start us off?
Okay. The UC has a reasonably complicated retirement program. In fact, there are three separate retirement programs depending upon when the employee was hired. For those hired before July 1 of 2013, that's 10 years ago, if you have more than 10 years of service, you belong to what's called the 1976 tier. I suspect that most people who are contemplating retirement in the next 1 to 3 years are in the so-called 1976 tier, faculty hired before July 1, 2013. There's a second plan called the 2013 tier for faculty who are hired between 2013 and 2016, July 1 of 13 through June 30th of 16. And then there's the current plan, which began in 2016 for employees hired after July 1, 2016. It's the same plan for faculty, staff, clinicians. All UC employees have the same retirement plans, either 1976 if hired before 2013, the 2013 tier if hired between 13 and 16, and the 2016 tier if hired after 16. Individuals become vested in the retirement system after 5 years of service. The size of the pension depends upon three factors. One is called the HAPC, the highest average plan compensation. That's the highest plan compensation for 3 consecutive years. Typically, that's the 3 years before retirement, but it could be any 3 years that have the highest compensation. Compensation includes the X and X prime components of the health science compensation plan. It excludes the Y and Z components. Y and Z are not part of the covered compensation for retirement purposes, only the X and X prime. There are some administrative stipends for department chairs and deans, for example, but primarily the income is from the X and X prime. The HAPC is then multiplied by the years of service and by fraction if there are months involved, and by an age factor. The age factor reaches a maximum at age 60 for those hired before July 1 of 2013. And between 2013 and 16, the age factor increases to 65. Then when you reach the maximum. So if you are 60, the pension is the HAPC times the years of service times the maximum age factor. After 40 years of service, the pension is now maximum. There's no advantage from the pension perspective of employment beyond 40 years. There are couple of things to be aware of if you're a high earner. The covered compensation, that is the basis on which the pension is calculated, is limited by the IRS under what's called IRS 401 A17. And the HAPC limit by IRS requirements is $345,000 in 2024. If the X and X prime exceeds 345, IRS cuts it back to 345, except if you were hired before July 1 of 1994. If you were hired before July 1 of 1994, the IRS limits the HAPC to $505,000. There's a separate IRS limitation that has to be considered, and that's on the total pension that can be assigned. I'm sorry, was there a question?
No, someone was on, didn't know they weren't muted.
Okay. The IRS limit on the total pension is $275,000 for 2024. UC recognizes that and has a program called 415M compensation. What UC does is creates a separate plan to add to the UCRP contribution to bring the total pension up to the limit allowed by the HAPC. It's all very complicated, and if there are individual cases, we can talk about them and go through the calculation. But the primary factors are 3 factors to determine the pension: HAPC, age, and service, subject to some IRS limitations. And then finally, that the base salary includes only the X and X prime. With respect to when you can retire, the campus allows 3 dates: July 1, November 1, and March 1 for faculty. There's some complicated reasons why that's true, but either July 1, November 1, or March 1. Most faculty choose to retire July 1, but there are 2 other dates. A couple quick questions, quick comments. You should start the retirement process 90 days in advance of anticipated retirement. There's a fair amount of processing required, and probably half the cases of retirement generate unusual questions that have to be resolved before the pension can be completed, before the pension calculation can be completed. So allow 90 days for the processing. Start 90 days before the anticipated retirement date. Quick comment about some decisions that have to be made. There are a couple irrevocable decisions that must be made at the time of retirement. One is a lump sum or pension. I think David will have some comments about when to choose the lump sum versus the pension. But once that decision is made at the time of retirement, it's irreversible. A second decision made at the time of retirement is something called a contingent annuitant. So your choice. Need not be your spouse. But once you choose a contingent annuitant beyond yourself, that's an irrevocable decision. Many people are concerned about phased retirement. The idea is they don't want to go cold turkey into retirement, but gracefully go into retirement. UCI does not have a phased retirement program, but effectively it can be created through a combination of retirement and then recall. That is, and I'm a perfect example of that. I retired and I came back, continued to function in my research, continued as department chair, and I actually served as chair of the academic senate in retirement. Issue is that the IRS limits the recall compensation to 43% of your pre-retirement income. So with the agreement of the department chair, one can retire and then continue service with additional income of up to 43%. That is the full retirement pension plus up to 43% of your pre-retirement income, assuming that you can find some funding source. For people who are members of the Academic Senate, upon retirement, you continue to be members of the Academic Senate. So that means you can continue to serve on Senate committees. You can continue to vote on Academic Senate issues. You can be a principal investigator on contracts and grants. You can submit contracts and grants. You can, for people in the basic sciences, you can continue to direct PhD students. You can serve as chair of the PhD committees. In other words, you can pretty much function in all the capacities of a Senate member following retirement. You remain a member of the Senate and have all the responsibilities and authorities of a Senate member. Faculty who have the title of professor or associate professor are automatically conferred the title of emeritus. Members of the Academic Senate who are not professors or associate professors, with the approval of the chancellor, can have the title emeritus added, and that's pretty routine. So let me stop there as a brief summary of the retirement system, and let David talk a little bit about some of the financial considerations that go into making retirement decisions.
I thank you, Dr. Parker. David, you want to share your slides?
Okay, I'm doing that. Welcome, everybody. So yeah, I'm a perfect example of what Bill mentioned. I actually retired in 2018. I was, for various reasons, forced to be chair of this task force on investment retirements. For those of you who don't know, there's two task force under the University of California Academic Senate that deal with retirement issues. One is the healthcare task force, which Bill served on for many, many years. So, and then the other one is the task force that I was chair of until very recently. But I just want to be clear that what I'm going to be talking about are really my views. And I can assure you, as soon as you get two economists in the room on these issues, you're going to get two different views. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to go quickly because I don't have much time. But I wanted to start with some investment basics, because one of the key issues, particularly for a medical school faculty, many of whom have their X and X prime is a lot less than their normal compensation. So they're going to have a lot of money to invest. So first of all, you can't beat the market. Okay, this is, people say this all the time, but it really is true. I've got data to prove it. There's a huge amount of work to try to prove this. If anyone's interested, the best single book is A Random Walk Down Wall Street by Burton Malkiel. I have no idea what edition it's in, but you know, if you get a used one, it's fine too. Nothing's changed very much. There's a problem. I'll give you some data to show what that looks like. The best way with this, both these things imply that you really should only be investing in broad-based index funds. And currently, only 60% of the world equity market is in the United States, suggesting that you really should be invested roughly 60% in the US and 40% elsewhere. The other thing, which unfortunately people need to be reminded of, any investment that promises high returns and low risk is either extremely risky or a scam. A recent example is the FTX mess. I actually have some personal experience with Bernie Madoff's mess. These are unpleasant. Any broad-based mutual fund or ETF is going to give you similar long-run returns. That's really a corollary of this theorem that says you can't beat the market. So you better choose one that has the lowest fees. The fees are certain. Everything else is uncertain. Similarly, narrow specialized funds. So at various times, people have jumped into high technology funds. More recently, people were getting interested in ESG funds, energy funds, you name it. These are all attempts to beat the market. They can and will almost certainly fail. and they typically charge higher fees. And by higher fees, I mean by a factor of sometimes 5. So you can lose a lot of money on these fees. Okay, so numbers. The only assets that are going to give you substantial real returns are going to be equities and corporate bonds. Everything else, gold, residential estate, and I'm talking about homes, even in Orange County, don't measure up. And so what I've done here is, down on the bottom of this page, you can get a great data source for this stuff. What happens if you invested $100 in 1928, and then we come to 2023? If you put it in the S&P 500, you ended up with 787,000. If you put it in BAA bonds, which is just corporate bonds, you got about 50,000. You put it in gold, 10, and homes. And this, by homes, I mean this is a national index of home prices. It's designed specifically to deal with the problem that the homes that were built in 1930 are not the same as the homes built today. It's due to Case and Shiller. Bradley Shiller won a Nobel Prize for at least part of this work. In the last column here, by the way, people frequently ask, well, what's a sure thing? Well, the only sure thing really is inflation, okay? And the way to get inflation, and only inflation, is to buy what are called short-run Treasury inflation protected securities, or TIPS. And if you did that, you put $100 in 1928, you'd have $1,600 left. And you could see you would be much, much poorer than if you put the money into the stock market. Okay, so one of the questions that was asked, I'm just going to jump ahead. What's the current status of the UC retirement plan? How does this impact faculty and staff planning for retirement? The first line is, and this is, I know, somewhat controversial, but UCRP is fine. And even if it weren't, it's not our problem. It's the regents. Right? This is governed by law, and federal law and state law. California is very tough place to dodge a pension. So particularly once you retire, you, according to the very good lawyers on my task force, UC retirees would have first dibs on UC assets. So currently, just so you know, UC, the retirement system, has an unfunded liability. It's about $20 billion. If we sold off the land under the UC LA campus, we get to worry. The increase employer contributions beginning July 1 of 2024. Many regions wanted to. And the big things that I will take some credit for during my tenure as TIFR is sort of getting the academic senate leadership to fight back against that. And we were successful, but I'm not sure how long that's going to last. The other reason I'm worried will think in inflation. The data I could get for UCRP is over 1991 to 2022, roughly 30 years. They got 8.05% returns. Turns out I could do just a bit better than them by simply putting 3/4 of the money into the S&P 500, 25% into bonds. And then I would have gotten 8.09%. And I've told Jagdeep Bachelor, who's the chief investment officer, that I'll be happy to take half of his salary, which I can assure you is at least 7 figures, and I will manage this for that. Okay? Jagdeep does other things, so I'm not going to do that. So the bottom line here is it's very unlikely UC is going to fail to meet its pension obligations. But, big but, retiree health benefits are not at all guaranteed. My guess is they are going to substantially decline. And the reason is as follows. Pretty soon, there's going to be a big budget crunch in California. That's going to filter down to UC. The regents and the office of the president are going to have to look at, well, what can we cut? Well, You cut existing salaries, you piss off current employees, they leave. Likewise, benefits. But what about retiree health? You can't cut pensions. I've already explained that. But if you cut retiree health, what's going to happen? Nothing. Bill and I have already retired. Where are we going to go? So I think based on that, I would not count on retiree health benefits continuing at anywhere near the level they currently are. That's the bad news. So why do I think that UCRP is so conservative? Okay, well, what this is a little bit complicated. So I graphed here is I've taken the annualized 20-year annualized return on the vertical axis and 20 years annualized inflation on the x-axis and just plotted all the points from 1928 to starting in 1928 or starting in 2002. And I don't know if people can see my cursor, but what you see is assuming is 2.5% inflation down here and about 6.75% return. So where my cursor is pointing about what UC is assuming. I should tell you these points down here, these 3 points are all starting in 1928, 29, and 2030. So once you get past the Great Depression, UC is really being pretty conservative. Most of these points are up to the above and the left here. This also gives you an idea of the kind of variability I was talking about when you talk about investments. Okay, so the next question people asked about, how does the university retirement system integrate with external retirement savings plans? What are the tax implications? This is a huge question. So let me take a whack at it and we'll see how we get. So the UC retirement savings plan does provide some low-cost funds that are appropriate for retirement savings. And so that's good. The default target date funds are fine for those who do not expect to get a large pension. In particular, people who in the 2016 tier choose savings choice, but they're too conservative for those who can easily live off their pension and Social Security income. Okay. Furthermore, the UC domestic and international equity index funds are quite good in terms of their coverage and their cost, but they exclude fossil fuels. And I will own up to being one of the authors of the con argument for, remember there was an academic senate vote on whether we should ask the university to divest. I'll be happy to explain later why I think that was a bad idea. If you agree that's a bad idea and you're looking for a one-stop shop, you can buy the Vanguard Total World Index Fund, which happens to be one of the only funds I know of that is an index fund that covers the whole world. It's fairly cheap. You can get it as an ETF through the Fidelity brokerage link if you so desire. Now, the one thing I didn't put on the slide that I probably should have is recently the UC Retirement Savings Program also has what's called a QLAC, or a deferred annuity option. So once you get near retirement age, you will have the option of using some of the money in your 403B to buy an annuity that's deferred until you're, I believe, age 78. That's possibly a good idea, but expensive. The rates that you get on that annuity are well below what I think you should be able to earn by investing the money. The bigger question, which is also, you may have heard or hopefully know, that last year UC finally put in the ability to save money in a Roth 403B. Probably the only one here who remembers this. Bill Parker remembers that the Academic Senate first asked for this in 2009. It was repeated in 2015 when I became chair of TIFR. It was repeated twice. And finally, and the reason they didn't do it, by the way, for those who have been around, is they claimed UC Path couldn't deal with it. So, but now finally UC Path has. So now you could, in fact, put your money into a Roth account. Why is this important? Recent tax law changes, I think 2 years ago, changed what happens when a regular IRA or 403B is inherited by a non-spouse. So if you're planning on giving your IRA to your child, Now their child will have to take the money out in 10 years. So if it's not hard to come up with a $2 or $3 million IRA balance here, if you work and you have high earnings. So your child could be paying tax on as much as $300,000 or $400,000 a year for 10 years. The tax bill on that could be very high. So to make this short, the low wage employees should almost certainly save 100% in their Roth accounts. Generally, tax deferred, regular accounts are only good if you expect your tax rate to be lower in retirement. What I found both in my case and many people who I've talked with is that's not true. Many people actually who saved a lot of money end up, because you have to take required minimum distributions, you end up with a higher tax rate when you're retired than you do now. If that's the case, you really want to be in a Roth. Converting a pre-existing pre-tax balance to a Roth is a fairly complex process. Many people should probably consider doing it, but just fair warning, if you do this, you probably should be paying additional quarterly taxes or you're going to get hit with some nasty penalties. So this is one where you definitely want to seek some additional advice. Bill mentioned that for those of you who were hired before July of 2013, you will have the option of cashing out, okay? This provides a useful benefit for a substantial number of employees. Roughly 10% of the employees take it. And I've included a link to the pension experience study. For those of you into modeling and numbers, you can see a lot of the data behind this. I've done a lot of modeling on this, and up front, I should tell you that I've done it myself. I cashed out. It's pretty common for one spouse in a couple with 2 long-term employees. But generally, if you're expecting to die soon, don't really need health insurance, or expect to leave a substantial inheritance, my analysis suggests you're probably better off cashing out. And I'll be specific about it. Something like 80% of the time in my simulations, simulating the kinds of variability you get in investment returns, you're going to come out ahead. Lump sum cash out provides more protection against inflation. The other thing Bill did not mention, what he should, which I will impress upon you, the one problem with the UC pension is not fully indexed for inflation.
Correct.
2 years ago or last year, inflation was 6%. Most UC retirees got 3%. Okay, so if that goes on for any length of time, it's not great. The only other place where this could be important, the other end of the spectrum, if someone is very low assets and worried about needing to switch to Medicaid to afford long-term care, if you've taken a lump sum cash out, it's easier to get rid of your assets. If you have a pretty high pension, it is really very hard or almost impossible to qualify for Medicaid. So that hopefully that no one will find themselves in that position, but it is something to worry about. Finally, one of the questions that comes up, and I know I'm running out of time, but I'll try and do this quickly. The question of, I don't know how many people here are involved in hiring new employees, but new employees have 90 days after initial hire to choose whether to take a traditional defined contribution plan or a defined benefit plan. So we call that savings choice, okay? The UC has put the default as pension choice. And this is one where I'm now speaking for TIFR, because it's not just me who agrees with this. We believe this is wrong for most people, and that employees are not getting sufficient education and advice. In particular, the Academic Council, so this represents an official position of the Academic Senate, asked President Drake to change the default. You did this back in October of 22. He sat on that request until June, when he rejected it. The same time, I requested data on years of service credit at separation. These are data that have to be provided to the actuaries for the pension. And once again, UC sat on it for a very long time. We finally got it in October. And so you're the first group to actually see the results. So it turns out that 75% of employees who separated between 2018 and 22 had less than 11 years of service credit. 55% had less than 5 years. You don't even invest in the pension plan unless you're here for 5 years. So the default of putting these people into the pension system is clearly not good for them. I'll just leave this to you just to see. I mean, there are some variability across groups here. This is for all of UC in 2019. I have similar graphs. It looks very similar. I've done one for UCI. It looks very similar. There's a lot of people who don't stay. And some of us, like Bill is one of these dots way out here. Some who've been here for forever. But a lot of people don't stay. So the bottom line is people should start with savings choice. That's almost certainly the case. Once it's clear that you're going to stay for at least 20 years, then it becomes optimal to switch to the pension choice, which you are now allowed to do between 5 and 10 years after your initial hire. And the model that I put, where I put that link. Yes, this model up here is a fancy model that is publicly available that you can give to your new employees. They can see for themselves. We have been working and pushing pretty hard on Hyun Swanson and others at the UCOP system-wide to improve their model, and hopefully they will. But for the moment, I'm really concerned that a lot of our new employees are getting really the wrong advice and making the wrong decision. By the way, if you choose pension choice or you default into it, that's irrevocable. If you choose savings choice initially, you can, in this 5 to 10 window, change and get out of it. Okay, I think I'm going to skip this. This is just some free advice I was giving out. One thing that is important is when you think about your investments, many people don't realize that you want to think about your pension and your Social Security payouts. Those are like treasury bonds. They're guaranteed. Okay, they're fixed stream. So how do you treat that when I say 80% of your portfolio should be in equity? How do you count these pensions? Well, that's pretty simple. Multiply by 25 to get equivalent asset value. So if you expect $100,000 in pensions and Social Security, that's like you held a bond of $2.5 million at 4%. If you take this view, most people, I would say almost everybody at UC has probably got way too much money in bonds. And so you should have all your other investments in equities. And I will skip this. Yeah, I will stop here because this is getting... Oh, I just should mention, yeah, the one part is interesting. RASC, which is the Retirement, what's it? Retirement
Administrative Service Center.
Thank you, Bill. They have recently hired 10 retirement counselors, finally. All of them are certified financial planners, and they have been receiving a fair amount of training. In fact, I spent 2 hours last Friday training them on some of the material I just ran through very quickly. So that they should be a good source of advice for anyone looking to retire coming forward. But I don't think they're available yet, but they will be shortly. Okay, well, thank you. I hopefully left some time for questions.
Wow, yeah, that was a lot. Clearly we have a couple of experts in this area, but we also have staff members available here and folks from Fidelity as well. Let me back up to the questions that came in. And one of them was the question about if you're a non-Senate faculty member, can you be emeritus as well? Now, if you're HS clinical, let's say. So it looks like the answer, Twee has answered that yes, but you'd have to have 10 years of service and you have to fill out a nomination form. Is that what you're talking about, Dr. Parker? That you have to...
I was talking about members of the academic senate who are not professors or associate professors. For example, professor in residence, professor of clinical science X are members of the Senate, but they're not professors. They do require to fill out a form. And It's pretty straightforward to use Emeritus. If you're talking about clinical faculty who are not Senate members, I'm not sure whether my initial reaction is Emeritus is not appropriate. It's only for members of the academic senate who retire.
Right. So there is a separate nomination process for that. And I don't think we do that pretty often. But if a department would like to do that for a non-Senate title, they can do that. And there's a separate process for it.
Okay, so it is possible. It's just not.
It is possible, yes. But it's a packet. It's kind of like a packet as if someone was to nominate a faculty for like a chancellor's professor. There's a nomination packet. There's letters. There's a department letter. CV is needed. So there's a whole process for that.
Okay, thank you for that. Other questions that have come in is Kyoko Yokomori asked about Fidelity's pathway to retirement plan. Kyoko, if you're still on, could you unmute and ask that question? Because I'm not clear what.
I'm so sorry. I'm so ignorant, right? So this S&P 500, I've heard about it, but like in the Fidelity, I was just advised to choose this pathway to retirement. Like they initially aggressive and they become conservative towards the targeting year. These things, I'm just using it. But is there actually a choice to choose S&P 500 in Fidelity? I mean, should we be doing more proactively looking for, different things by ourselves?
So I would say yes, but we have many experts on. So
okay, well, I'm going to claim to be an expert because I've studied this. If you're expecting a pension from UC, a substantial pension, then you almost certainly should not be in one of these pathway funds, because these pathway funds, and I should say that UC also has its own pathway funds, which are available through net benefits. But they tend to put you like 60% in, sometimes even 50-50 in equities. And as I just mentioned, if you treat your pension as a bond, then you've got you've already got a lot of your portfolio in bonds. So you want to put all the other money you have in equities. And yes, it's easy to buy the S&P 500. I would not recommend it. The only reason I put the S&P 500 on my slides is that's the only data I could get going back to 1928. Okay.
I think I would add that our advice would be a little different for low income employees versus high income employees like faculty. So I'm not sure you would make the same recommendation to a staff member who is less well compensated.
Well, I'd say it depends on the relative amount of money they need to live on. If their pension is sufficient for them to live on,
that's what I'm talking about. Low income, it won't be.
Okay, that's true. Yeah, yes, this is not a one size fits all thing by any means.
Jason or Jin, did you guys want to comment, as you guys are from Fidelity, about Dr. Yokomori's question?
Yeah, I would say a big factor is, risk adversity, because somebody could be 100% in the S&P, but not okay with the volatility. And oftentimes they sell out when the market's down. So that is part of it. I totally get your point, but, I've been doing this for 22 years and I've seen a lot of people make big mistakes. So, I mean, there's that side of it too.
To elaborate, you mean big mistakes as in selling, panicking and selling, or?
Yes. Yeah. Like 2008 is a great example. You're 60 years old, maybe got a decent pension, maybe not enough to cover your needs. You've got a decent 403B, let's say, and it's all in the S&P. I spent many long days trying to convince people to hang in. And a lot of people didn't. Market was down 50%, which means half the people sold out. And frankly, a lot of those people didn't come back for years. And, so anyway, there's a risk element there too, that not every person can handle that.
Yeah,
converse to that, what I've been advised, maybe David or Bill could take this, is because you have these timed plans that you retire in 2030 or 2040 or 2050 through Fidelity, is if you want to be more aggressive, one thing you just do is pick a retirement fund in that Fidelity system that is far beyond your actual retirement year, so that you are more in stocks than bonds, and the system
I see.
that way. So what is your comment on that strategy? Anybody?
Yeah, I agree. And I think you get more diversification that way. I see people do that. I think that makes sense. On the other side of it, I see people go a little bit more conservative in some cases. There are people, frankly, that just don't like risk, period. And the inflation argument, I totally get, but there's also that element of risk there. So I think it's a good segue to say, meet with us, on an individual basis, and we can discuss your situation.
I want to push back a little bit on that, because the problem with going in, the biggest risk really in retirement is outliving your savings, right? That's the biggest risk. We don't know when we're going to die. If we did, this would be an easy question. And the problem here is, and I was making this point for years, but now it's easier to make. The last couple of years where inflation ran 6%, okay? Suddenly your pension is being eroded away. If you're in bonds, you got killed last year, okay? So yeah, there's risk and there's risk. The only thing that really is not risky are short-term Treasury inflation protected securities. That gives you exactly inflation, okay? That's what I put up there. And the problem with that is you don't literally earn zero on that in real terms.
If it works out right, yes.
Yeah, so that's by definition. So I think largely, yes, it is. And I understand, Jason, because I've been managing a fair amount of money for my family. And believe me, in 2008, I got all sorts of yelling and screaming. But you have to explain, it's hard to explain why that's the really wrong time to sell out. And I also know people who did and who didn't get back in. And many of you probably don't know this, but most of the gains in the market occur in a very short number of days. So things go nothing happens, then there's big losses and there's big gains. And so if you're trying to time that, chances are almost 100% you're going to blow it.
Totally agree.
Dr. Parker, I wanted to switch gears. You had mentioned that we didn't have phased retirement here at UCI, but you have the option of coming back on recall. So if we have a lot of clinicians here on the line, can you explain what that would mean for them if they come back at 43%?
When if you have a reasonable number of years of service, say 25 to 30 years, then you have a reasonable pension. So you have guaranteed monthly income from the UCRP, which becomes a floor for your compensation. You can then add on top of it up to 43% of your pre-retirement income. So it's likely, in most cases, that the take-home compensation will be greater. So when I retired, I continued as department chair. I negotiated with my dean to get 43% of my pre-retirement salary plus the UCRP pension. So my take-home pay went up by about 30%. So you have to remember you have a base of the retirement income, and then you put on top of it 43%. The 43% is an IRS limitation. You can't go above it. And it also depends upon the funding sources. Now, in the health sciences, if you're a clinician, you're generally earning through your service the funds that can pay the 43%. So it becomes equivalent to phased retirement if you look at it from the perspective of your take-home compensation. The advantage of retirement is that you can tell your department chairman no. You have more flexibility in retirement to adjust the workload. How much do you want to work? If you want to continue to work full-time, which is what I did, I worked full-time for another 5 years, and my take-home pay went up. And then I chose to reduce the amount of time I spent on university business. So phased retirement was something that worked for me in two ways. It gave me more flexibility to manage my own time, and it resulted in greater take-home pay. So I was able to structure a phased retirement that met my personal needs. And I think that's available to any UC employee with the support of their department chair, because they need the income to generate that 43% recall. Now, there is a requirement
for the clinicians, majority of their salary comes from their Y component.
Right.
So that would still be included in that 43%.
Absolutely,
Okay.
but it's still limited. Now, the 43% is calculated on the basis of the combination of X and X prime. So you look at the X and X prime, take 43% of it, and that would be the maximum that you could earn through other sources.
Mhm.
I do have to mention that there's a mandatory 30-day break in service. So when you retire, you cannot be recalled until at least 30 days. And UC recommends a longer period, typically 60 to 90 days. But you must have a break in service of at least 30 days. And I want to ask someone from HR if I have that correct.
That's correct, Bill.
And also, if you take a lump sum payout, you cannot come back on recall. Is that correct, or can you?
No, you can, because I did. And
Yeah,
You can,
but you still
sorry.
have the same limit of compensation.
yeah, the limit, the 43% limit still applies, but yes. But if you take a lump sum, you're not eligible for retiree health benefits.
I'm going to disagree a little bit with David. I'm more optimistic that the university's contribution to health insurance is going to remain substantial. Now, in my case, I happen to be with Kaiser, so I apologize to the UCI physicians. But with Kaiser, the university actually pays me. I don't pay a dime for health insurance. The university fully covers my health insurance. In fact, it more than covers it, pays me several $1,000s a year. So I think if you make the right choices on healthcare providers for the foreseeable future, I think the UC Health coverage is going to be reasonable. And the reason I say that is the academic senate is a relatively powerful voice in decisions, and the Senate is going to aggressively pursue continued retirement health care. But I do agree it's more volatile than the pension.
We have a question from Dr. Nakvi. His question is, are there differences between the DCP under savings choice and a traditional 401k? Also, are there any benefits to switching from savings to pension plan any earlier than 5 years after starting employment? I think, Dr. Brownstone, you kind of touched on that.
Yeah, well, first of all, you can't switch any earlier. You have to wait 5 years before you can switch. And no, there really isn't any, the DCP and savings choice. These are all examples of defined benefit plans. Those are where the amount you get out depends solely on the amount you put in your investment returns. So yeah, but there's a window between 5 and 10 years after your date of initial hire where you can switch to the pension. And if anyone is considering that, I strongly urge you to take a look at this very complicated model that we've posted on the web I gave you. If you have additional questions, I'd be happy to help out, because it is an irrevocable and complicated choice.
Do we have any comments from Sarah, Susan, or Roy? You guys are here with us from the Retirement and Benefits Office. If you guys had any words of advice that you would want the faculty to know before they start this process.
Let me, before going on, let me add a couple other comments. The lump sum cash out is not available after 2013.
Yeah.
It's available only for those who were hired before 230. Yeah, only available to those hired before 2013. So when we talk about lump sum, it's only for the 1976 tier eligible faculty. So for anyone hired in the last 10 years, lump sum is not an option. There are other benefits that UC continues to pay in retirement. For example, vision care, is available in retirement in exactly the same way as it is for active employees to some cost. The dental is included in retirement in exactly the same way as for active. If you are a retired faculty member and join, in fact, if you're retired and join either the retiree or the Emeriti Association, then parking on campus is free. But you have to join the one of the two associations and pay their annual dues, which are quite nominal. So free parking is free is like most commercials. I have to put it in quotes. Free parking is available upon retirement.
That's amazing. So Uma Rao asks, for the UC paid health benefits, is it limited to Medicare rate for low? Well, that just jumped on me here. Sorry. Is it limited to Medicare rate for low income, or does it pay for high income before retirement?
Actually responded to that. Can you, if you could please clarify the question? Are you asking if you're Medicare eligible, does UC contribute as a retiree? Or if you could just give us a little bit more detail, that would be great.
Uma, you want to unmute?
Can I ask?
Yes.
So I know that Medicare charges like an annual premium, say, for example, based on income just before retirement, right?
Yes.
This one. So for those with higher income, like physicians, we'll have to pay a higher premium for Medicare, right?
Yes.
So in a way, what UC health benefits, UC RP indicates is that we should sign up for Medicare.
You're required to.
Yeah, you have
when you retire.
Sign up for Medicare.
If you're
So
over
which means,
65,
like
if
we
you're
have
over
to pay
60,
the higher premium.
yes, if you're over 65 and retire, you are required to enroll in Medicare.
Right.
Medicare premiums are means adjusted. So if you're a highly compensated individual, the Medicare is much more expensive than what you would think. It's
Right.
It's increased by about a factor of 3.
Right. So when
most people
we
are surprised at the cost of Medicare if they're high earners.
right. So because UC pays benefits, like you indicated, if you have 20 years of service, UC pays the full health benefit, right?
Not
but
quite.
does it pay that higher
No, it has to be more.
because we have to sign up for Medicare?
You have to be more. It has to be more than 20 years, but.
Actually, if I can please intervene on this, because this is a really hot topic with UC retiree health. It really depends. Every person is different. It depends on which retirement tier you're in. It depends on what age you are at retirement. Because if you're in those other tiers, UC they do contribute at some point if you are eligible for retiree health. So in the case that you're talking about, if you are Medicare eligible when you retire, that will be your primary. Like Bill said, it's mandatory that you enroll in Part B as your primary. And if you qualify to have UC retiree health as secondary, UC does contribute, just like we do now. UC contributes to our medical rate and then we pay a portion. It works similarly in retirement, but it depends on what UC contributes depends on, again, your age and what your years of service is. So it really varies on everybody, and there's not a one answer. It's very individualized. And so it is a big hot topic. So it really just depends on that when you retire, which tier you're in, what your age is, if you're Medicare eligible, and some other factors too. So I hope that helped a little bit.
And it depends upon which UC medical plan you choose.
Correct.
Yeah, that's correct.
I said I've chosen Kaiser, which is the lowest cost plan. To me, it doesn't cost anything, but there are UC plans that are relatively expensive. And I hate to say it, when UC Care or the equivalent to UC Care is one of the more expensive plans.
UC Care is more, and also 20 years does not equal free medical coverage, if that makes sense. So it really, again, it's individualized.
After 20 years, you get the full UC contribution.
It's 100% of the maximum contribution. There's a split cost, 70-30, 70% UC, 30% retiree. So when we say 100%, we mean 100% of the maximum contribution. So it's not 100%. So some folks, it is very, like Bill case, it's different. He may not pay 0, he may pay 0, but for some folks, they do pay. There is a portion for retiree, but it just really depends on where they fall when they retire. And retirees, for the most part, most do pay more than active employees. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Let me just rate one other issue that Dr. Rao raised, which is important. If you have substantial balances in a regular tax deferred account, like a 403B or a regular IRA, once you reach 73, you have to take required minimum distribution. So start at about 4% and go up pretty quickly. Those minimum distributions count for your income. And that will, depending on the base income, that will raise your Medicare Part B premiums. So yes, when you go ahead and think about whether you want to convert some of your balances to Roth before you get to age 73, but you also want to take, it's actually a fairly complicated calculation. But that is another gotcha here.
Thank you.
That is something to remember when you do financial planning in retirement. If you have substantial assets in retirement accounts, 403B, IRAs, when you reach 72, you have to start taking out the minimum required distributions. They add to your taxable income, and the amount coming out is surprisingly high. If you have saved quite a bit of money, when you get into 75 to 80 and you have to start taking out those funds, your income tax brackets go up, your Medicare costs go up, and you find yourself having more financial obligations than you anticipated. So I think it's useful to sit down with a financial planner if you have substantial assets in retirement accounts to go through what changes occur when you start taking the mandatory distributions. As I say, the impact can be surprising on the negative side.
Yeah, well, this is the other reason why, if the younger folks on this call, if you're not already putting all your money into Roth, you probably should be. Switch it from the regular to the Roth 403B, and you'll minimize some of these problems going forward.
So is there any downside? I'm sorry, Namisha.
Oh, no, go ahead. Finish.
I was going to ask David, because I've not paid enough attention to this, and I'm getting old. Is there a downside to converting to Roth at any given time? What are the disadvantages?
You got to pay tax. And
well, damn it.
You got to pay tax right then when you do it. And if you're not careful, you can get hit with big tax penalties. So if you decide, okay, I'm going to convert $50,000 in my IRA to a Roth, and you haven't paid additional taxes before April 15th, you could get hit with a tax penalty, because the IRS requires you to anticipate any anticipated expenses have to be accounted for in your estimated tax payments. So there's a little bit of a gotcha there.
Okay.
But the big gotcha is you have to pay tax on it, and you have less money then to invest after you've paid the tax.
Right. Namisha, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
No, I was just going to make a comment. So Susan put in the chat, because I know a lot of you may have individualized questions. And she said, you can get more individual counseling. You can open up a case with the Employee Experience Center about your retirement benefits. And she put that link in the chat box. I just wanted to point that out in case people didn't see that. And I think also Jason and Jen from Fidelity are here. I think they are assigned UCI Fidelity representatives, and people can, faculty and staff are allowed to meet with them as well individually. And I know they can give advice as well. It's a very complex process. So I think my recommendation is always to keep asking questions and continue to learn.
I should also point out that starting, I believe, spring quarter, RAS counselors will be available to answer these questions. And as I said, I've met with them just first time Friday, and they look like a pretty good group. They're well trained.
Amplifying a little bit on David's comment, always ask more than one person for advice. You're going to get different recommendations in many cases. If you get the same recommendations, it's probably okay. But ask several people for advice, because there will be different opinions, and the variety of opinions, I think, helps shape your own thinking. Let me add, if people have questions about continued membership in the Academic Senate or about phased retirement, don't hesitate to send me an email at william.parker@uci.edu, and I'll be pleased to attempt to answer your questions, particularly about the Senate phased retirement. Financial questions I'll leave to the economists, although I do have my opinions.
And our Fidelity advisors. Well, Dr. Brownstone has a hard stop, and we are at the 1 hour mark here. So I want to thank everyone on our panel. If folks can stay a little longer, that's great, but we can dismiss people as they need to go. We do have advisors from Fidelity on hand, folks from the benefits team. And I guess if we could just put in the chat, where does anyone know the URL for where we would go to meet with a RAS counselor when that happens?
It doesn't exist yet.
Actually, I just got an email last week that they sent to the benefits managers. They just posted the new website, and the calendar is available starting this week for appointments.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so I'll post the link in the chat for everyone.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Any other last minute questions?
Or last minute comments from our panelists? Anyone else?
Yeah, I would just say real quick, you know, we're happy to meet with you as well. And one of the questions I have here is, you know, the question I get a lot is, am I on track to retire? So when you're thinking about all this, a lot of moving parts, there's the pension, there's Social Security, there's the voluntary accounts. There could be Roth IRAs, traditional IRAs. And so, you know, we have really comprehensive software to help you kind of tie that all together and look at it after tax income, you know, in retirement, kind of bump that up against what you think your expense needs are. So we offer that all complimentary. So I'm going to try to post in the chat if I can, the link to schedule a one-on-one with us, but that's Jen and I's job is to help navigate that with you.
Yeah, please do post that link. We appreciate it.
One other advantage of retirement, which I failed to mention, is that upon retirement, you no longer pay the 7% into the retirement system. Right now, all active employees pay 7% of their compensation into the retirement plan. That goes away when you retire. So your take-home pay goes up by at least 7% from the disappearance of the retirement tax. Also, Social Security generally goes away, at least goes down substantially. So your take-home pay can go up because of reductions in Social Security tax and the UCRP pension tax. So talking to people like Jason, he can go through all of the financial advantages of retirement, which include the reduction of these deductions from your paycheck.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing I will say, I'm no longer the chair of the Task Force on Investment and Retirement. Jill Hollenbach, who is a researcher at UCSF, is, and our task force is available to help with problems that people, that they get really nasty problems going through retirement. We have stepped in, I have stepped in a number of times with RASC to try and help out. I mean, obviously you should try and, you know, solve your problems if you can yourself, but many people may know that there are real problems with the RASC process for the last few years. And there's been some pretty nasty cases that we've had to deal with. But so Jill Hollenbeck is available, or you can email me if something really nasty comes up. But hopefully not. Hopefully, you know, hopefully you will have a smooth process.
I work part-time in the provost's office as the faculty retirement liaison. And in that capacity, I have intervened on behalf of a number of faculty with RASC, escalating their issues to the senior management level to get them resolved. So between people like David and myself, faculty have access to the highest level of UC management, not for routine problems, but for the really sticky ones, which occur a little more frequently than one would hope.
All right. Well, we will be posting this session to the Associate Dean's website so that you can review it later. And if there's materials, Jason, if you want to email me links. We can post those up on the website as well. And folks, you're encouraged to click on that link now.
Can be inspiring. They bring with them a fresh